Hello fellow hoarders of the blue and welcome to my channel, and first of all, excuse the reduction in production values. I am moving to a bigger studio at the moment, normal service will soon be resumed. And now, welcome back to Heavy Contrast, a series of videos where I show you how to paint amazing looking miniatures using just contrast type paints and highlights. And for this new season, I'm extremely pleased to tell you that Corvus Belli has decided to sponsor it, and during a full year, I will be painting Infinity and War Chrome miniatures for the series. Check out the incredible minis they make using the link in the description. For this entry, I will show you how to paint the amazing Mechazoid Sokorentai, one of the coolest minis I've ever seen, in a stunning Chrome NMM and red. And yes, all of that using contrast type paints. So, let's get cracking. So as you can see, we are starting from a base coat of black spray, and I did a zenithal with my airbrush using just white. And you can use a spray can, but I use the airbrush just because the airbrush lets me do a more targeted approach and a smoother look overall. My first step is going to do the red, and for that I'm going to use a mix of 1 part Flesh Tearers Red, 1 part Blood Angels Red, and 1 part Express Medium. And I'm using Express Medium intentionally here to get the mattest result possible. Because I have a super cool zenithal, I'm going to try and preserve as much of it as I can, making as little mistakes in the application of this as possible and being as neat as I can. And I'm going to follow Vincenzo Celeste's color scheme on this, which I think is the coolest version of this mini I've ever seen painted. Of course, my paint job is not going to be as good as his, not even close, but it's going to be, hopefully it's going to be good enough. If you want to stay away from GW paint, a good alternative for this color would be Seraph Red mixed with Express Medium. Just know that Seraph Red is not going to be as intense in terms of saturation as this mix. It's still a fantastic color, but it's not as saturated. That's what I went with this. As you can see, we can get a very smooth result if we apply our contrast paints in the right way. I have a video about that, so check it out if you're having issues. With the red done, and it was mostly a clean application, there are a couple mistakes here and there that I will fix when I get to the white. I want to first do all of the black details. The model is basically just 3 colors, it's just white, black and red. So taking care of the black now will allow me to clean everything up and do the white as neatly as possible. For the black, I'm going to do it 2 ways. For the interconnecting parts, like these muscle looking things, like tubes, I'm going to use pure black Templar, just like that. Be very careful. It's again a very intricate model. It can be quite difficult to reach all of the details if you glue everything up, but that's how I roll. And I will also apply this in all of the bits of the armor that I want black. Example here on the feet, all of these details, I want to paint them black, mainly so they don't draw too much attention to the feet, rubbing attention to the important parts like the face and the chest and the swords. And now for the other black details that are just the weapons, I'm going to do first a dry brush using pure white. I could have done this before, but it doesn't really matter when you do it. I'm just going to pick out all of the edges here. If you brush in roughly the same direction, you will get all of the details nicely picked up. I'm doing this before applying my contrast paint, just so I have all of the details nicely picked up and I have to do the minimum amount of highlights. The weapons are on the back of the model and they shouldn't be the center of attention. We just need to paint them and make a good job of that, but spending hours edge highlighting all of these details would be such a waste. Sometimes it's better to just work smarter, not harder. With the dry brush done, I'm going to move to Black Templar again and do this layer. I want a very thin layer over all of these details so that my edge highlight shows through. If you find that your Black Templar covers too much, you can always thin it down with some Express Medium. I think I'm going to do just that for the gun, because I'm feeling like it's a bit too intense on the sheaths of the katanas, so I'm going to thin it down one-on-one with Express Medium, so I have a bigger highlight there. I can always apply more layers if I feel like it's not dark enough, but again, the weapon, despite being a weapon, it's still a background detail, so we shouldn't spend too much time painting it. The idea is to just do maybe a couple of edge highlights on top and call it a day. I think for Infinity models especially, it's so much better to spend some time on the armor, making a really cool highlights and playing around with all of those super nice shapes, than to spend your time edge highlighting a weapon with 100,000 edges, which looks really cool, but you know, it's not necessarily what you want to spend your time on. Now, to fix all of the white details so we can have a clean surface, I'm going to use these three colors: Mechanicus Under Grey, Corax White, and White Star, or any white you want. Using a combination of these three colors, I can more or less recreate the zenithal with it, either by using them normally or just by mixing them and creating intermediate tones. This doesn't need to be perfect, just more or less. We just want to erase any of the red that might have gone onto those surfaces. And so for the darker parts, I will use Mechanicus. For the medium parts, I will use Corax, and for the very light white parts, I will use just white. But if I need to mix a color in between to match it, I will also do that. So all our colors are now placed, and he looks quite good. I already did some testing for my highlights, but more on that later. It's time now to finish the white, because maybe it looks rather good, but I want the white to look like a Chrome NMM as per the original paint job by Vincenzo. So I'm going to use two express colors, Wasteland Brown and Starship Steel, to create that effect. And in my case, I'm just using the reference image from Vincenzo's paint job, but basically anything that is facing downwards, I'm going to apply the brown, and anything that is facing upwards, I'm going to apply the blue. I'm thinning them down quite a lot because I want a subtle effect. After applying the blue, I wasn't really happy, so I'm going to try and do something a bit more drastic using Mystic Blue mixed with Starship Steel in about 1:1 ratio. You do want this to be quite thin. I'm basically doing a glaze here. I really like Starship Steel, but it just wasn't cutting it as a blue. There you go. That's way better. Oh yeah, that is looking amazing. I will just keep doing this with my glazes of Mystic Blue mixed with Starship Steel and the Wasteland Brown until I am happy with the level of saturation and shading. You can do these stages one after the other, but for me, in all honesty, the best way to do this is to do both colors at the same time, so you have a good understanding and a good balance between both of the shades. With our shading on the Chrome done, he looks absolutely stunning. Just one thing I did differently was for the pilot, I didn't want him to look chrome, I want him to look white, so I just did a Starship Steel over the armor. That's it, as simple as that. And it's now time to start with our highlights, and I want to start with the black, because if I make a mistake, it will be easier to correct it now than afterwards. So my first color is going to be Dark Sea Green from Model Color. This color will be basically a perfect match, or almost perfect match, of what we have already there. So it's a good paint to fix any mistakes and to re-establish our highlight. I will do a minimal amount of work with this paint because, as I said, it's basically the same color as the one we already have. I just want to clean up and pick up some of the darker edges. For the next highlight, I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of Dark Sea Green and London Grey. This will be our first real highlight, and I want to focus all of my highlights towards the same point in the model, just to make it coherent. This combination of grays have turned into my all-time favorite. They just work so well. If you don't want to do this mix, you could always use something like basalt gray, which will be a good intermediate step. But just for the sake of reducing the amount of paints, I'm just going to leave it as is. In this case, for the weapons here at the back, I consider them more like a background detail. I don't want to draw too much attention to them because all of the nice stuff is going to be in the armor, and I don't want the weapons, which are just resting in the back, to be distracting, so just a simple highlight like that is going to be enough. And finally, I'm going to take pure London grey to do my final highlight. I might do one more highlight on the stuff that I want to look particularly reflective, but for things like the muscles here on the armor, this is just going to be my final highlight for them. In the case of this model, the black is not that important. The focus should be on the red and on the chrome, so just enough highlighting so that he doesn't look unpainted is enough. As I was saying, if I want a little bit more shine on some of the details, I can use something like silver grey to add that touch and make them more reflective. For example, like that. But I'm not going to touch the muscles. With the black done, and I consider this to be more than enough work for the black, I'm going to move into the white, and the first highlight I'm going to use white gray, because we used so many colors. If we jump straight into white, it can look a little bit jarring. So for the darker edges, I'm going to start with just a beautiful off-white. I'm just picking up the edges with this. And finally, for the chrome, I'm just going to use pure white. Whatever white you have will suffice. If you want to know which one I'm using, it's cold white from Model Color. And I'm just going to reinforce basically the highlights that I did with the white gray. With the chrome finished, and I'm so happy with how this looks, especially for the time spent doing it, it's now time for the main attraction, which is the red. And I'm going to use 4 different colors. You can definitely just mix your own shades. I'm going to start with vermilion from Model Color. As you can see, it's a very close color to what we already have there. And if you just add white into this, or a skin tone like basic skin tone, you will get the same result. I just prefer not to mix. It just makes things easier for the videos and for myself if I want to replicate this in the future. I'm going to start with the vermilion, and I'm just going to use this in the dark parts of the paint job. For example, here, I'm just going to define all of the edges in the dark areas with this beautiful light red color. This will be very prevalent in the dark parts of the model, so this whole section here. But for the lighter areas, it's just going to be applied, in the downward facing areas and in the dark parts of the pre-shade. It's just a way of adding a little bit more definition into the paint job. If we want to add some volumetric highlights, we can also use this same vermilion, just thin down into a heavy glaze consistency, and adding this into some bits, for example here. Just for demonstrational purposes, I'm going to just do this leg as is tradition, but I will paint the rest of the model later, obviously. For the next step, I'm going to use Faded Red from Model Color. I really like this paint. It's just the perfect pink to highlight red with. I'm just going to use this to do a general edge highlight. Try to do that highlight as thin as you can. With these large models, it's such a pleasure to work with, if I'm honest, but you can also do it with normal size models. You will just need a little bit more time and a little bit more concentration and brush control. I want to add some volumetrics. I'm going to enhance what's there from the pre-shade, and for that I'm going to thin this down into a very thin glaze, and then just going to apply that, just like that, very carefully. It's very important that before we add more layers, we leave this to fully dry. Otherwise we will lift off paint, you see there. Still a little bit wet, it's very dangerous to just keep on going. And now it's time to use our third color on the progression, which is German orange. Again, just mixing a little bit more of the basic skin tone onto the vermilion will get you the same result, but these colors are beautifully made and they just work so well that it is a shame not to use them, if I'm honest. I'm going to target now all of the bright edges that are facing the source of light or facing upwards. And in the areas where it's very, very bright, I'm just going to paint the edge. As well as doing a little bit of a volumetric highlight, just to increase that, automotive look. In the darker areas, I'm just going to do a dot of this as a dot highlight. And for the last step, I'm going to use basic skin tone to do the final highlight. If you want to push this even further, you can go up to pure white if you want after this, but for me, this is more than enough. It's amazing how quickly this miniature was finished. By focusing on the important parts, we managed to get an amazing result in no time whatsoever. And with the clever use of express paints, we were able to produce a quite convincing Chrome NMM super easily. Thank you all for watching, and thanks to all my lovely patrons that make these videos possible. You have all of the names going in the screen right now, and if you want to join them, you can check the link in the description and in the pinned comment of the video. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!